Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome into another YouTube live show. My apologies for, 10-minute delay there. I was busy watching the latest enthralling installment of the Kansas State men's basketball season, which turns out to be a loss at UCF. So, huzzah! In a great mood tonight as I begin the show. Lot to talk about, though. Today, we will talk some basketball because I've got a question for you, and that is, has Houston surpassed Kansas? Like, is Houston now in Kansas territory as they have clinched a share of the Big 12 title at least for a second consecutive year? And if you're keeping track at home, that's 2 for 2 on Houston Big 12 regular season championship since entering the league. But there is a lot of football, and I want to branch off of a comment that was made by a national media member, Bud Elliott, earlier this week about the Big 12. And it's something that I know not a lot of Big 12 fans are going to like. Not a lot of Big 12 fans are going to like, but I do think that there is a dose of reality in it, with also, based on some of the response that I saw to that, a little bit of hope. So I promise, I know Wet Blanket says Big 12 gloom and doom enters the chat, which, Wet Blanket, I mean, you're a Wet Blanket. You're supposed to be the gloom and doom person here, Wet Blanket. It's not all gloom and doom. Okay, it's not all gloom and doom. But I do think this is an example of, something that a national media member can say that is negative toward the Big 12 that is hard to dispute. We've also got to squeeze in a little bit of ESPN could potentially be a saving grace in college football. Can they save the sport? Who would have thought that we would get there after the tortious interference claims of Bob Bowlesby once upon a time because of the ESPN pulling in to the SEC, Texas, and Oklahoma and everything that happened there. Okay. So that's what I have planned for you tonight. Going to get into it in just a moment. You guys know, if you've been here before, how this works. But for those who have not, obviously fill up the chat. Appreciate everybody who is here. You can leave all the questions or comments you want there. But if you want to ensure that your question or comment makes it on the show tonight, click the $ below the chat box to submit a super chat. Appreciate everybody who does that. Could not do it without all of your support. Going to get to Zachary here in just a moment who did that. But there are free ways to support the channel. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I would very much appreciate it if you did that. Told you guys the other day, I looked, over half the people that have watched the channel in the last month are not subscribed. So it really helps out. Totally free, very easy to do. If you are watching on Twitter, if you just pop over to YouTube, search John Kurtz, subscribe there. That would also be very adequate. It would be amazing. And of course, to support the channel, you can subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter as well. It is at ofbnews.com. That's ofbnews.com. And you can find the link in the description of the video as well. If you have a need for some merch, you can click the merch link in the description as well. So there's that. And if you're not able to catch the show live, you can go to Venmo and chip in with a donation there, John-Kurtz-4. And if you leave your question or comment there, I will kick off the next show with it. So plenty of ways to get in touch with the show, plenty of ways to be a part of the conversation. Wet Blanket is all over it. Wet Blanket knows exactly where this is going. But first, we start with Zachary. What's up, Zachary? I appreciate you, man. Thank you for being here. Zachary says, now with having to negotiate with the Big 10 and SEC, is there a way where the Big 12 and ACC can keep their champ in the top 7 or 8 to guarantee them at least one home playoff game? Wreck them. Yeah, maybe, when we talk about things that could be negotiated here, if the SEC and Big 10 truly think that there is a chance that they could get the unanimous approval that they would need from everybody else in the playoff to change things next year so that there aren't the automatic buys for conference champions, that would be the type of thing that, like, maybe that's on a level enough where you get a concession like that. Maybe. I still doubt it, because we're talking about doing that for 5 or 6 years, whatever the playoff contract length is. You're talking about doing that through the end of the decade as opposed to just a 1-year change, a 1-year tweak. Doubt that they would do that. And I got to read the ESPN story to you. It's from John Wilner, and it sounds like there could be a proposal that actually just wipes out the 4 auto bids for the SEC and Big 10 anyway. That could still be on the table because ESPN is kind of putting its foot down. So I think that it would be very unlikely if that could happen. But to me, that's the one scenario where I would see that happening. If you say, all right, you guys are going to strong arm us into this year, then you're going to concede this for the next 5 years through 2031 of the college football playoff. We're going to be guaranteed our champion getting a home playoff game. However, structurally, it's going to work out, which, again, we still don't know if it'll be 14 or 16. Sounds like the heavy lean is 14, but we don't know that for sure. So that would be my thought on that, Zachary. But I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate your support of the channel, my friend. Okay, let's get going. Let me start you off with this tweet. It was a tweet, and it is about a week old here at this point. I'm coming into it a little bit late, so my apologies on that. But Bud Elliott, popular podcast host, 24/7 Sports, Cover 3 podcast, think he does a great job, but he was responding to I guess I could say fan here, responding to a listener who said, it's hilarious to sit here and listen to you spew blank about how the Big 12 is closer to the G5 than it is to the ACC, SEC, and Big 10. And Bud Elliott says, in terms of having a league title contender, the Big 12 is closer to the G5 than the other 3 Power 4 leagues. I love the Big 12 for its entertainment value and competitiveness, but barring massive structural changes to college football, we'll all be dead before a Big 12 team wins the playoff. All right, so that's something that a lot of people are not going to love, right? Certainly not going to love hearing that from Bud Elliott there. If I were Daddy Wren, who looks like literally in his handle would be a West Virginia burner account, I probably would have just left that at the ACC Big 12 conversation and bring the SEC and Big 10 into it. I feel like that sets yourself up to be dunked on a little bit more. If you just keep it at the ACC, like, we can probably have a conversation, and will, by the way, here in just a moment. But as it stands, I mean, it is the national media slamming the Big 12 again, and I got to admit, it kind of seems like they're right. Now, I don't love the tone of that from Bud Elliott, where it's like, all right, man, like, maybe a little bit much on the, hey, we'll all be dead, but the content of what he's actually saying there, it's hard to really dispute. So, maybe we can massage the messaging a little bit there. Bud Elliott, who he is a guy, I mean, he's a Florida State background. Okay. So that's going to make him probably lean in even more to the ACC piece of it. So maybe West Virginia burner that I was just talking to, that wouldn't have actually mattered had you just kept it at the ACC. But look, I think if we're talking about national championship opportunity here, like, it's all about talent. If you want to have enough ammo to be able to go out and win 3 or 4 games in a row against top 10 to 15 competition, like you saw what Ohio State's road was this year, Tennessee, what am I missing here? Tennessee, Oregon, Texas, Notre Dame. You want to rip off 4 straight wins against teams of that caliber, you're going to need, I don't know what the baseline is, minimum top 15, probably, talent roster. And we do have the 24/7 talent composite, which measures this. I guess you could say it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good in terms of keeping track of all your roster and what they were originally as prospects, how much talent you actually, raw talent you have on your roster. There's not a Big 12 team in the top 20. There's not a Big 12 team in the top 25 right now, according to the talent composite. Last year, TCU was at 28, and that was the highest ranked team in the talent composite. Now, that's also fitting because TCU was the last team to play for a national championship from the Big 12. It happened in 2022 and, I guess early 23. And we all know how that ended, right? We remember that. I don't need to remind you about 65-7. Now, that's all-time good Georgia team. One of the better national champions I think we've ever seen. Like, that's a really, truly elite team. There was not a team out there at that level this year. 2022 TCU going up against, if they got to take on Notre Dame in the national championship game, they're not getting smacked around like that. I don't think they would get smacked around like that by this Ohio State team, even as great as they were at the end of the year. But you get the point. Like, TCU is as close as it gets, and they're at 28 in the talent composite. Yes, Arizona State, not anywhere close, top 25 in the talent composite, and they did come within one play of beating Texas. That is true. They played a phenomenal game, and Cam Scatterbo became a star, and it in a lot of ways earn some legitimate, real respect for the Big 12 out of that. But then you'd have to go say the targeting gets called, right? Or they bat down a pass on 4th down. Okay, if that happens, you got to go do it again, and you're playing Ohio State next. And then if that happens, you got to go do it again. You're playing Notre Dame. You've got to replicate that 2 more times, and that feels like a bridge too far. You're gonna start to wear down, and you would have, even if you're thinking about, hey, it's a coin flip game if you're playing at Texas and Ohio State or Notre Dame. Even if you believe that, which I think most people would not, but if you believe that, flip the coin 3 times, the odds of that happening, it's not a very likely thing to me. So I have a hard time really disputing it. It's a different beast, and I hate that is the reality and that it is that way. I mean, it brings me no pleasure to say that, and there's a big difference between me saying, hey, it's unlikely the Big 12 wins the national championship, and hey, the Big 12 will never win a playoff game against the SEC or the Big 10, because those are 2 completely different things. Hell, that TCU team that I was just talking about beat Michigan on its way to the championship game, which nobody seems to really remember or talk about. So the national championship part of it, tuck it away. It sucks. It is what it is. It's the reality. If you want to have a debate on the ACC, which to me is the more interesting part of this, then we can sit down and at least have that conversation, okay? As I mentioned, Bud Elliott, Florida State background, so probably more partial to the ACC and certainly more partial to Florida State and what they bring to the table. And look, for starters, hard to really blame him if he's going to lump the ACC in with the Big Ten and the SEC. Part of the reason that a lot of the conversation had gravitated toward Big 12 versus ACC, not just because clearly both leagues have been left behind in revenue, but it was also because of the uncertainty around the future of the ACC and what was going on there. Well, the tide has turned. We'll see if it lasts, but at least for the time being, the tide has turned back the other way on that, where it looks like the ACC now has some more stability. They got the ESPN option picked up on the contract. All the reporting seemed to suggest that they're at least in stages of negotiating, something that would drop the lawsuits between Florida State, Clemson, and the conference. It appears that the ACC is going to be secure for the next 5 or 6 years until we get to 2030 and everything starts to kick back up again. So if that's the case, that changes this convo a bit, because now we're talking about, all right, the brands of Miami, Clemson, and Florida State are going to be there, and not just the brands, but the talent. I was surprised going by how they performed recently, but if you go look at that talent composite that I mentioned, Clemson's number 5, guys. So now they don't look like that when they're actually out there on the field. They're not playing like that level of program. They have fallen off to just being a good program, not a great or an elite program, but they still clearly can get talent at a higher clip than anybody in the Big 12. Florida State is 13. And as bad as they looked this past year, they had a highly touted portal class, and they played to a 13-0 regular season and then ACC championship game just a year before they got screwed out of the playoffs. So they were close. They were there. Miami is the one that I have a harder time with. Okay, they're 14th in the composite. I know that they're going to get talent, but we're going on 2 decades now of Miami doing this song and dance. I got to see them prove it before I would really lump them into that category. But I also understand how you say, well, the ceiling is still technically there more, John, because they are consistently hitting in the top 20, top 15 in talent. Okay. All right. So despite the fact that I saw some Big 12 fans pushing back on this, to Bud Elliott, I get it. You are correct. The Big 12 was an objectively better football conference than the ACC this past year. That is very true. Sanger and rankings showed it. The bowl and playoff performances certainly showed that. You've got that to hang your hat on. But unfortunately, 1 year does not make up for the talent gap. And really, it's not even just a talent gap right now, but a talent potential, a talent ceiling. Maybe that would be the better way to phrase it. You have a higher ceiling on the ACC because of what those teams have consistently showed that they can do in terms of accruing talent. Doesn't always work in practice. Doesn't always mean that it comes out to be that they go on to play like a top 10, top 15 team, or in Clemson's case, a top 5 team based on the talent that they have on the roster. But they at least have that upside there if they're going to be able to get those guys. And with a 1-year sample size on the Big 12 being the better league, it's kind of the same thing as the SEC this year. Look, I was there beating the drum as hard as anybody. The SEC was a special conference this year, but it also doesn't mean that because of 1 year, they just lose all the credibility for what they've done over the last 20 when they have definitely been the best conference in college football. Perhaps exaggerated a little bit, but obviously been the best conference in college football. So that would be my take on it. I do think Bud Elliott, unfortunately, is generally correct here and correct with all of it. And we'll see now if the Big 12 can go out and be better than the ACC again next year, and the SEC isn't as special next year, and the Big 12 breaks through and wins that game against Texas or whoever it might be in the playoff. Okay, like now we're talking about a trend in a second year and some more, but you do have to go do it more than just the 1 year. The other thing that's interesting here is it's not like the talent acquisition game is just like fixed and you're stuck 28 and below forever for the rest of your lives. I mean, we're seeing what is happening with Texas Tech right now, for instance, right? You can, especially in this unique era that we're in, which currently is wild, wild west, you can go out, and if you have a multi-billionaire donor like Texas Tech does, build yourself a top 3 portal class. And if you start doing that over a couple of years, well, your talent composite's going to look a lot better. It's going to start to look a lot better. I still have my questions about how everything sorts out with NIL when you have to have fair market value deals and what that would mean for a situation like that with Tech. A lot of variables, but I think because there are so many variables, you have to stay open to the fact that something like that could happen. And you could have another team be able to enter that conversation, the high ceiling conversation, because of talent that they're able to add. But again, it will take time. That will take cycles of doing that. It will also take better high school recruiting to fuel the program with that, because the portal, you're going to have to like reload every year. So it will take time to really shoot up that talent composite, but Texas Tech appears to have the resources to do it. So on this front, Bud Elliott from the Cover 3 podcast tweets that the Big 12 is not going to win a national championship in our lifetimes unless there's some drastic change to the structure of the sport. Josh Pate started talking about that, and he made that point on his show. He, as you might guess, agreed with Bud Elliott. And once again, I would agree with the general point and premise. But somebody in the comments, I did like this comment if you're looking for a little bit more Big 12 hope. The comment was this. It just said the Big 12 can do it the same way Clemson got the ACC titles. If one Big 12 team soars ahead and dominates everyone year in, year out, that team will have a shot at titles. So there's your hope. Can a team do that? Can a team really take the bull by the horns and start to make the playoff every year, win the league? Doesn't have to be winning the league if you're going to have 2 automatic playoff spots, which it looks like is where we are headed. But if somebody can do that, then, hey, they could build a brand. This is a brand building opportunity. Something to keep in mind. I know I've said it to you guys a couple of times, but first time I talked about it was going into this season when we were thinking like, hey, at best, you're most likely going to just be getting 1 playoff bid every single year. Now we're looking at opening that up to 2. If you're trying to brand build, if you're one of these schools that feels like you've got the resources to compete year in and year out, if you consistently make the playoff and you find a way to win a couple games there over the course of 4 or 5 years, that's going to do wonders for your brand. And it opens up more of a brand building opportunity than what you had in the 4-team playoff era, because it was just so hard to get there. Like, you were not going to get there multiple times. A lot of the casuals watch the playoff. They're going to watch the playoff. So if you're a team that is consistently there and there are more spots open now to the Big 12, like, that's advantageous. That gives you something that you didn't have before, if we're talking about how it equates to currency in the realignment game and trying to get yourself invited into whatever the upper crust is going to be in 2030, 2031, which we don't know. We don't know exactly what that will look like. And maybe it's all just a fool's errand anyway. but that gives you a chance. It gives you a chance. So there are a couple of questions here. If we're going to use the Clemson example, which I do really like, because I'm going to outline to you Clemson's history before Dabo Swinney here in just a moment. It is not very different from a lot of Big 12 schools. But the two questions would be, one, can one Big 12 team actually win consistently enough in the Big 12 to do this in a league that is filled with so much parity, where the number 16 team in the preseason poll just won the league last year? And the downside of this discussion to me is it seems kind of doubtful. Now, the two playoff spots make a big difference. If it were just one, and you're taking one team in all likelihood to the playoff every single year, and it's a 12-team playoff like that, it gets really hard for me to say, I think somebody will consistently be able to do that. I mean, we would have thought Utah was going to be the squad to do that, and Utah finished damn near at the bottom of the Big 12 last year after being picked to win it. And again, Arizona State, picked 16th, won the thing. So that's the whole hallmark of this league, right? It's crazy exciting. It's up and down week to week because you don't know who's going to win games, man. You don't know who's going to win games, and everybody can look very silly, and I'd imagine that is going to continue. I don't think that was just a one-year thing, and part of it is you can read the tea leaves on that. Like, all these schools are very similarly resourced. There are not schools that have massive historical advantages, facility advantages, brand advantages. We can definitely talk about the financial advantages that like a BYU or a Texas Tech probably have over most of the teams in the rest of the league. But in general, you've got teams that are pretty close together in terms of resources and what they're doing. So that's going to increase disparity a lot. So you've got to win consistently and get one of those two playoff spots almost every year, because keep in mind, we're talking about like 6 years next year, and then the new playoff contract. We're talking about like 6 years for you to get this done. So can somebody get to the playoff 4 of 6 years minimum is probably where that conversation starts. If you want to build a brand anywhere near like what Clemson eventually put together. So that is some good. You'll have more opportunity to do it. Now, what are we talking about doing if you're going to become the new Clemson, right? So Clemson, I mean, stop me if this resume sounds kind of familiar. Had one national title before Dabo showed up, one in school history. It occurred in the 80s, 1981. And they had a grand total of 3 11-plus win seasons before Dabo showed up. Those were in 1981, 1978, and 1948. Okay, so not a lot of this like super high-level success at Clemson before Dabo showed up. And in the years before he got there, they were a solid program, but not elite. They won 8, 8, 9, and 7 games in the 4 years before Dabo showed up to take over that program. So, I mean, national champion in the 80s, solid football history, but not spectacular. Who does that sound like? That sounds an awful lot like the resume of BYU right now, right? I mean, Colorado's got a national championship in the early 90s. They have been very good at points in their football history, but never on any kind of an elite level. You know, Texas Tech, if we're talking, hey, the program was winning 8, 8, 9, and 7 before took a real step up here and jumped up and built the Clemson brand. I mean, Texas Tech, that's basically what Texas Tech has been. 8, 8, 7. That's where Joey McGuire has had it. Now you're looking to take the next step and start to do that consistently. So then what did Dabo do after that? Well, he got it rolling by year 3. First 2 years, a little bit rocky, but by year 3, he wins 10-plus games. He wins 10-plus games for 12 straight years, which is insane. Goes to 5 playoffs, 2 national championships. Now, understand with this discussion, I'm not talking about a Big 12 school realistically in the next 6 years or whatever, winning a national championship or winning 2 national titles. We're talking about getting to the playoffs. That 5 playoff number might be a little more apropos here. Can you do 4? Can you do 4 of 6? And the door will be much more wide open for you to be doing that than Dabo getting to a 4-team playoff in the era that we are talking about, which 4 of those 5 playoff appearances came from that. Now, in order to make that happen, I mean, Dabo got generational talent at quarterback, back-to-back QBs like that. And Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence that certainly played a huge role in that 6-year stretch where they were just absolutely at the very top of the sport. Alabama, Clemson, 1-2 at the very top of the sport. And I don't think if you look around, I used the example of a Texas Tech or a BYU. I don't think if you look around, you're going to confuse Baron Morton or Jake Retzloff with generational quarterback talent. Okay, but Clemson did start to get everything on that level with Taj Boyd, still a very good college quarterback, but definitely not generational talent college quarterback. So could somebody replicate a Taj Boyd? Yeah, probably so. Probably so. Can you do it in 5 or 6 years? There's no time to waste here, man. You better start now. This better be a team or a program that makes the playoff next year. Or very much so in 2026, if that's going to be the first year that opens up 2 auto bids for the Big 12, you better be there by then. Because by year 5 for Dabo, if we're talking about, again, 5-year stretch year 5 for Dabo, he got up to number 3 in the country, had 3 straight 10-plus win seasons, couple 11-win seasons. So you'd have to do it pretty fast and string together seasons that start to look like that. So there's good and bad here. That's obviously a lofty bar, but you have more of a brand building opportunity than Dabo had because of more access to the playoff. Bad would be Dabo had generational talent at quarterback, going to be tough to find. Good would be he still had a lot of success with a Taj Boyd caliber quarterback. You can probably do that. That's something you could probably replicate. Another good, I don't think it takes, if we're talking about building your stock for not only being a team that could win the national championship down the road, but also in a realignment currency sense, be a school that could ensure that you're going to be there for the next evolution of what happens in the 2030s. I don't think that being in like a huge media market is going to really matter a whole lot. Might help out TCU a bit if it ever came down to that for the Big Ten, but that we're talking about like some kind of tiebreaker if TCU is the team that pulls off 4 in 6 years, and is able to put themselves in that sort of position. So it doesn't hurt, but I don't think it's any sort of necessity. What it's about now is your brand and how much it matters in college football. So if you're a team that gets to the playoff 4 of 6 years and you are winning games, that can matter to college football enough to perhaps put you on the same sort of level. At least maybe a diet Clemson. Maybe I should have started with that. Can you become a diet Clemson in all of this? All right, let's check in with Gabe. I appreciate you, Gabe. Thanks for being here. Gabe says Texas Tech had a top 25 high school recruiting class before this year when they went portal heavy. They also just opened a $50 million football center. I saw the video that's been going around about the $250 million football center. It's incredibly impressive. And I know like Ross Dellinger was one national media member I saw who was commenting about that earlier this week. So guy who's covering the sport and all the ins and outs of what's happening off the field as well as anybody out there is taking notice. So Texas Tech is doing legitimately everything you possibly can from a financial standpoint to support all of this right now to try and be that school. You got to break through and do it, and we'll see if Joey is the guy for the job, but Texas Tech is doing literally everything you possibly could from a support standpoint. So I'm with you there, Gabe. It will take time to build up a roster that I think would consistently rank highly in the 24/7 talent composite. Probably another year or two of this before you start to see like major improvements there, because you got to, and that's where I say like the high school part of it matters almost as much as anything for the composite, because you need to just filter that through like the entire roster. It can't just be 10 guys that you're pulling out of the portal every single year if you want to compete truly with the breadth of talent that you're going to see at Miami, Florida State, Clemson, places like that. But Tech is on the right track. Tech is undoubtedly on the right track there. So I think any of these lists where you're talking about upside and who has the potential to turn into somebody like this, Texas Tech absolutely has to be included just because of the resources that they're pouring into everything. So on that note, one thing that John Wilner wrote about, this is one of two things that I'm about to talk to you about from John Wilner. Pac-12, well, formerly the Pac-12 hotline, now the Wilner hotline. Guys covered the Pac-12 and football on the West Coast forever, and really well connected, good reporter. he was talking about, well, he got a question in his mailbag about what happens in that next iteration in 2030, 2031, and could any Big 12 teams actually be positioned by that point to get in? And that's what we have just been talking about. Like, can somebody turn themselves into a mini Clemson in the Big 12, at least brand build the way that Clemson did by ascending from being a school that's been just solid at football throughout its history to all of a sudden toward the top of the sport? Here is what Wilner said. Wilner points out the obvious. First target will be Notre Dame, followed by North Carolina, Clemson, Florida State, and perhaps Miami. None of that a surprise. We know that if you're ranking available teams on the board, available programs, schools on the board in the conference realignment landscape, Notre Dame's going to be one, but 1A or number 2 is North Carolina. They will be right there. And then Clemson, Florida State, for sure. Next 2, they've been fighting aggressively to get out. They are definitively, based on what their football prowess is and the brand power that they hold there, they're going to be next. And then Miami, maybe opinions can differ a bit on Miami, but they still hanging on. I mean, they're clinging at this point, but they're still hanging on to that cachet from the 80s into the very early 2000s that, we're now 2 decades clear of, but they're still hanging on to it. Now, this is where this may start to bother some folks, and I'm sure many would disagree. But Wilner also says in the ACC, Miami, Georgia Tech, Duke, Louisville, and NC State would probably be on the top tier of candidates. Some of those are like, the Georgia Tech, Louisville, NC State, that's been kind of a Big 12 tier that people have talked about if the ACC were to ever implode. So I can see some bristling at that. Georgia Tech, though, there's sleeping giant potential there right now, and it seems like Brent Key might be the guy to unlock some of that, no pun intended, with the way that he's coaching there. So Wilner lists all of those first. He gave the example, hey, maybe this thing goes to 48 if we're going to be generous and say Super League of 48 teams, so there would be 14 spots left outside of the current SEC and Big Ten, which would put you at 34. So he's counting all this up. Notre Dame, North Carolina, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, that's 5. Miami, Georgia Tech, Duke, Louisville, NC State, that's another 5. So there's like 4 spots left at that point. And Wilner says, what about the Big 12? Which schools are likely to emerge as the marquee brands over the next 5 or 6 years? He lists 3. He says 3 immediately come to mind: Arizona State, BYU, Texas Tech. So there you have it. Arizona State, BYU, Texas Tech. Fans of those schools can rejoice. It is funny, is it not, how much this does seem to change year by year, though, right? And I'm not at all saying that Wilner is wrong in his calculations for this. I will read you those in just a moment. But if you go back just a couple of years, I think most people would have been saying, well, TCU would definitely be at the top of that list because they're in Dallas. They give you DFW. That would be a particular value to the Big Ten because they don't have a Texas presence like that already, whereas the SEC does. And they were just coming off a national championship game appearance, and they've been a school that has won 12 games multiple times in the last decade plus, going back to the Gary Patterson era. Like, they've shown that they have that sort of ability. And I just told you they were highest on the Big 12 talent composite. They typically have recruited at a higher level than everybody else in the league. So, like, that seems to make a lot of sense, right? TCU would be right there. Last year, we would have said Utah probably still has as much upward mobility as anybody because of the football brand that they had been developing. But it's the Big 12, man, so it just all fluctuates. Like, there is not a singular brand or a couple of brands that really stand head and shoulders above everybody else. So it just, it can kind of ebb and flow based on what happens in a year. Texas Tech gets really serious about their money. They start to shoot back up. BYU is definitely getting really serious about its money. We see what happens with AJ DeBonsta on the basketball side of things. They turn some heads and have a great football season. And then Arizona State, always kind of viewed as a sleeping giant. Now they have a tremendous football season, and Kenny Dillingham is a, lightning in a bottle, very young, incredible head coach. So that's how things have changed. Here is how Wilner described it. He said, whether it's deep-pocketed alumni, Texas Tech, institutional wealth, BYU, or a massive community and alumni base, Arizona State. All three have proven or potential advantages in the revenue sharing era. Now, Wilner does, Utah fans, don't fret. Wilner does also say the other school worth mentioning is Utah, which seemingly doesn't possess the array of resources to match the three schools mentioned above, which, yeah, it would appear that they don't. But I don't know. Utah's trying to be serious, at least about what they're doing with a basketball coach, because they canned Craig Smith when he was 7-9 in a league that he was picked at the very bottom of. So, and Wilner points out, but for many reasons, the Utes are the most Big Ten-esque school in the Big 12 by a factor of 10. Now, Utah fans, you will take note here. Just because you are the most Big Ten-esque out of the Big 12 does not in any way mean that the Big Ten is going to be legitimately interested right now. But if you rip off 4 of the next 6 playoffs, especially if you're doing it with Morgan Scalley and not Kyle Whittingham, maybe we can talk. Anyway, that's what John Wilner had to say about all of that. Building yourself up, possibility of that. What school in the Big 12 could be at the forefront? I don't know that I would have a whole lot to add to that list. If Coach Prime really is someone who's going to, if he's like a lifer at Colorado, he's going to be there for the next 15 years and will keep winning and keep bringing in really high talent the way he is right now. If that's something, okay, maybe Colorado's got a chance. I think most of us would sit there and say we sort of doubt that happens. But they did survive, they being Colorado, did survive the flirtation with the Cowboys job this year. How much longer can that last? What if big college jobs start coming after him? What if Mike Norvell flames out at the alma mater of Florida State? We'll see. I would still have my doubts that that's what Coach Prime is going to be, but that would give them the chance if he is. I certainly would have mentioned BYU. I certainly Texas Tech. I've already said TCU. I still think Big Ten hook, if they were to really start to win big, helps that they're in Texas, helps that they're in DFW, and they have been a program that's proven that they can win big. I mean, Baylor has had the moments of rising up with double-digit win seasons. Dave Aranda's got a long way to go to, I think, earn back trust that he can be somebody that does that consistently. K-State has been a very solid. They've been, like the Clemson, like 8-8, 9-7. I mean, that's been the K-State program. But I don't know that we've seen evidence that Chris Kleiman's going to be the guy to elevate it to the next level and do that consistently year in and year out. Would need to see that first. I tend to agree with Wilner in the list and how he lays it out there. You are definitely going to be behind probably most of, if not all, 10 of those teams that he rattled off there first, and then you would have a chance, and it would be very up in the air. I would not suggest, if you were playing like a Vegas odds game on what school is going to be that or what schools from the Big 12 would be that over the next 4 to 6 years, I wouldn't want to be putting any of my hard-earned money on that. I think that's a really foolish thing to try to do. Okay, like the video, please. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Appreciate all the guys who are here. You can click the $ below the chat box if you want to submit a super chat and make sure that your question or comment gets on tonight. And you can hit me up on Venmo at John-Kurtz-4 if you have a question or comment there. That is reserved basically, mainly, not for everybody, but what am I saying? It's not totally reserved for this, but if you are somebody that's not catching it live and you want to be a part of the conversation, drop me a line there, a question or comment there on Venmo, John-Kurtz-4, and I will read your question or comment to kick off the next show. Click the link to subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter in the description of my video. You can also just go to ofbnews.com, and there's a merch link in there. If you want some John Kurtz merch, if you want some Open for Business merch, it is available there. So college football is in a bad place when I'm about to say the following. And this really goes for college sports, not just college football. But ESPN could step in to save it all. ESPN is the entity that you are waiting on to come in and save the day. Yes, the same 4-letter network that pulled Texas and Oklahoma away from the Big 12 to the SEC seemed to give exactly zero you-know-whats about the remnants of the Big 12 at that time, whether or not they would just explode into the ether, go into a college football black hole, and never be seen from again. This is the same ESPN that was behind the Longhorn Network, which drove a wedge to the Big 12 anyway. It's the same ESPN that had his former head, John Skipper, give a near admission on the Dan Le Batard show a couple of years ago that they were the ones really pulling all the strings and controlling stuff behind the scenes. Yeah, that entity that has clearly already done a lot of irreversible damage to college football is the entity that might have to step in and save the sport. So, we're in great hands. We're in great hands here. This is from John Wilner, who, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Wilner Hotline has covered the Pac-12 forever. It used to be the Pac-12 Hotline, San Jose Mercury News. Here's the nuts and bolts of what he said. He is basically more or less just corroborating reporting that we've already seen about how ESPN feels about where playoff expansion is going, and namely what the SEC and Big Ten are trying to do with the 4 automatic bids. So it says, multiple industry sources have told the hotline in recent days that ESPN is not necessarily eager for changes and might be staunchly opposed, which could create a most interesting dynamic. ESPN has no relationship with the Big Ten beyond the playoff, but it serves as the SEC's exclusive media partner. It owns Tier 1 rights. It owns the SEC network. It provides the platform for the SEC's broad media machinery. Ross Dellinger, I'm trying to remember what the specific wording was in his article, but he said more or less the same thing. Like ESPN seems like they may be giving some real pushback here on 4 auto bids for the Big Ten and the SEC, because they look around and realize, hey, that's probably not the best move for long-term business here. ESPN finally starting to think long-term, saying, if we do that, and it seems like an invitational, and we're kind of cutting out a part of the country that's going to grow really disenchanted by us pulling a stunt like this, that's not good for the long-term viability of this business. We don't want you guys to do that. Here's how Wilner describes it all. Wilner says the automatic bids would enable the SEC and Big Ten to create play-in games on championship weekend, with number 3 playing number 6, 4 facing 5, for example, for the final spots in the playoff. But those changes could undercut the competitive bar that ESPN covets and risk alienating sections of the country with major media markets. So they are worried about, look, they've already in a lot of ways lost a bunch of the West Coast by blowing up the Pac-12 and what happened there. How much of the country do you wind up cutting out, and how many TV households are you disenfranchising about the sport, and maybe they would turn it off eventually. We're talking down the road, but eventually maybe so. Wilner says, imagine 4-loss SEC teams strolling into the playoff while 2-loss Big 12 teams are left at home. That's the point that he is trying to make there, that you could run into situations like that and people looking around going, well, that's crazy. Like that, it should not be that way. Apparently ESPN also does not like logistical challenges. Under the 12-team format, 2 of the 4 opening round games face direct competition from the NFL. So if you went to 14, he's saying you would face more direct competition from the NFL, because at that time of year, the NFL, they're just trying to commandeer your entire life. Speaking of, being money hungry, pleasing shareholders, the only thing that seems to matter in this world of ours anymore. The 14-team model would create 2 additional opening round games. Where would they be placed? The NFL plays Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday of the targeted weekend. So what do you do? Where are you going to play that? That would be tricky. And then if you're a TV network like ESPN, you're saying, well, if we've got to add 2 more games that are going up against the NFL, how much are we really gaining here in terms of viewership? Like, that's going to be a hell of a fight for us. And then we looked at this first year. Lane Kiffin told us to keep tuning into the playoff, and all these games were not very close. So if we're putting like blowout first round games on up against the NFL, well, we're going to be screwed. We're not going to make very much. That's not going to net a whole lot for us. So here is how Wilner sums up the situation now that arises from this. Would Greg Sankey, SEC commissioner, would Sankey dare ram through playoff changes that ESPN opposes? Is there a middle ground? Or could the most radical aspects of the proposed format, which would be the 4 auto bids, get left on the negotiating room floor? I guess it really comes down to how much of an appetite do Sankey and Petitti really have toward being bossy czars of college football. They're already pretty much there, But it's one thing to pick on the ACC and the Big 12 and the Group of Five. It's quite another to pick on ESPN, especially when you are as deeply embedded as they are with the four-letter network right now. So, yeah, like we know they don't care about any of the other conferences. I mean, that's not going to stop them from doing something, but could their television overlords and such massive business partners for them be the ones to do that? We'll see. We'll see. Here's a possible solution that Wilner throws out there. He says, could ESPN increase the rights fee for the 14-team playoff in exchange for no alterations to the regular season schedules, which would eliminate the need for the automatic bids and the unattractive play-in games on championship weekend? So what he is saying there is that as of right now, if the playoff expands, right, you're getting all this money, $1 billion+ contract for the college football playoff, getting all this money, but in the contract, it does not say, hey, if we expand to 14 teams, ESPN is obligated to pay more. That's not in there, but they could do that voluntarily in exchange for saying, hey, whatever you think you're going to make from going to the auto bids, which will allow you to do the play-in games instead of the championship game, however much money you think all that's going to put in your pocket, let us just give that to you for expanding the field, and then just don't do that. And we'll preserve, for both of us, we'll step in and preserve the betterment of this long-term business for everybody involved. You know, I mean, it's a very surprisingly anti-Super League sort of stance from ESPN as far as that goes. Like them realizing that you gotta leave enough of the sport still intact and standing and theoretically having a chance to compete at the very, very highest level. And if that were to happen, by the way, I think all of us would celebrate. It would be a win. I do genuinely think a win for the better, long-term health of the sport. But if we are talking more short-term Big 12, I actually do think that could have short-term negative implications for the league. And the same would go for the ACC, because you wouldn't have two auto bids. And we saw what happened with the Big 12 this year. Like, if it were a 14-team playoff this year, do we think BYU was getting in? If it were a 16-team playoff this year, do we know for sure that BYU would have gotten in? I don't know, man, based on the way they were being talked about or not talked about. So that is the point with that one. Could be a little bit of an exchange that you would have to make there if you are the Big 12, if that were to happen, or if you are the ACC and that were to happen. But I think probably better for the long term of the sport. And the best thing overall out of all of that, it's not just that this could be a good thing for the long-term health of the sport. It's that it seems that ESPN, we now know that ESPN is capable of thinking about something other than short-term cash grab and what's better for them in the immediacy in the short term. Like, this is not being done out of some altruistic, value that ESPN has for the sport. It is about their dollars and cents long-term. But at least if you've got them thinking about the long-term viability of the money here, that's going to lead to some better decision-making for all involved. And so that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay. Make sure you like the video. I would appreciate that. Click the like button. Click the subscribe button if you have not subscribed to the channel. That would be great. Subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, ofbnews.com, or click the link in the description of the video. Anybody who really wants to support me right now, I would genuinely appreciate it if you did that. Very easy to do. 3,500 plus other subscribers, totally free. Comes to your inbox multiple times per week. Get you all the Big 12 news you need to know. I filter through any of the Big 10 and SEC stuff. How does this matter to the Big 12? You can get that straight to your inbox at ofbnews.com. You got about 10 minutes left. I've got one more take to get off for you here before I depart. So it is buzzer beater time. If you want to make sure that you get something in, click the $ below the chat box to do that, to submit a super chat. And you can go to John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo if you would like to get in touch with me that way. If you are not watching this live, you can leave a question or comment there, and I will kick off the next show with that. So it's on the basketball front. Houston put together another gritty as hell road win at Texas Tech on Monday night. A shorthanded Texas Tech team, yes, but an impressive win in a raucous, rowdy environment, about as good as you're going to get in college basketball right now. And they clinched a share of the Big 12 regular season title again. That's 2 in 2 years for Houston in the Big 12. Meanwhile, the guys that were supposed to be the big dogs in the league, man, Kansas and Baylor, those are your two national championship caliber programs. They're scuffling big time. Most of this will focus on Kansas, but I include Baylor in this too, because that's a team that won a national title not very long ago, a post-COVID national championship, and is now struggling to make the tournament. Kansas is going to make the tournament, but they're struggling to keep that seed above water right now. So I asked the question. I mean, Houston's clearly on a Big 12 takeover right now. Have they overtaken Kansas? Has Houston overtaken Kansas? Are we officially declaring them now top dog in the Big 12? However it is that you define that, I will get to more on that in just a moment as to how I would specifically define that and what I think about that. But man, I mean, Houston's just so tough. Like I tweeted, feels like they could win a road game in hell. They've got the longest road winning streak in the country, and you can see why. They have so many guys that are just gritty and tough and are always there to make a play when they need it. And I can hear Tech fans. I hear you. I can hear everybody screaming at their television or phone or computer screen right now. Like, hey man, Darian Williams and Chance McMillan didn't play, down two of our best players. It was a 6-man rotation. I understand all that. It's very true. It's very true. It definitely changed the game. But I would say if you're going to pound that too hard right now, you're diminishing an accomplishment for yourself, because really the point that I'm making here with all this and being impressed by Houston is that was an insane atmosphere and an insane environment. United Supermarkets Arena is a hell of a place to try. Speaking of hell, a hell of a place to try and go win a game in right now, especially when it's a big time matchup that has Big 12 championship implications, and you've got celebrities sitting courtside. Like, that's gonna be an insanely raucous environment, and it was. I would sum it up like this. Texas Tech fan friend of mine hit my DM on Twitter on Monday and said, Mahomes courtside, Yormark courtside, Cody Campbell courtside, stadium packed, 2 top 10 teams, Big 12 hoops, no other conference has this aura. And you basically could just narrow that down to, like, Texas Tech has this aura. That's a tough place to go in and win. And they did. They did, and made it look easy's not the right word, but they can just kind of like casually also not the right word, business-like. There we go. It's just like another day at the office for Houston when they go win road games like that. It's another day at the office, and somebody will step up and pull a little bit more of the weight. It was Uzan on Monday. It was LJ Cryer on Saturday against Iowa State, had 28. Obviously, we've seen Juwan Roberts do it a lot, can be Emmanuel Sharp. They just have so many guys that can step up and do that. Remember, I told you when I was going through and making my midseason All Big 12 team for the Open for Business newsletter, it's like, I got to include somebody from Houston, but it's tough because they're all just hovering right around the same level in terms of impact and stats. So it's really difficult to pick one out of that group, but it makes them a hell of a team. So that's going on for Houston. They're winning a game like that, ho-hum, against Texas Tech and achieving at least a share of a second straight Big 12 title since entering the league. And they are, in absolute all likelihood, going to win it going away solo this year. And then on the other side, you got Baylor, national championship program. Scott Drew, all this, I mean, in danger of missing the tournament. They lost their third straight game last night by 2 at Cincinnati. Boy, 3 straight years of second round losses. I mean, they're getting to the tournament. They're not getting bounced in the first round, but 3 straight years of second round losses. That's been just like a stone wall put up, and now might not make the tournament. We'll see. But probably will, but they got to stop the bleeding if they're going to. And Kansas, who has been the absolute top dog, has not been back to the second weekend since winning the national championship 3 years ago. Bill Self, meanwhile, is fending off retirement rumors because it's not just the story from Barry Trammell and the Oklahoman that came out, but then the Field of 68 podcast with John Fanta was on the Field of 68 podcast talking to Jeff Goodman and company, Rob Doster and crew, and he had said, hey, I mean, he was speculating about it. Like, I think this could be it. I think this could be it for Bill Self. That meant that Jeff Goodman then reached out and asked him about it, and Self said that's not true at all, that he's considering retirement. But he's having to bat down these like retirement or like, are you leaving things? And it's because things are going by his standards so poorly. And he does have the health issues there to think about too. And his team actually out on the floor obviously just does not look good. He's mired in the worst season that he's had at Kansas. And they're still, earlier this week struggling to put away Colorado, winning by 7 on the road, like nothing to write home about. And Kansas, by the way, they're 10-7 in the league. They got to finish with Tech, Houston, and Arizona. So, 2 of the 3 games are at home, but have fun with that. That's not easy. So based on the current states here, based on a couple-year trend of Houston coming into the league and doing this, like, are we ready to say, is Kelvin Sampson the alpha dog now? Has he overtaken Bill Self at the top of the hill in the new league? Is Houston the new Kansas? I mean, if we're looking at the tail of the tape, they finished 5 games in front of Kansas last year. They're 6 games ahead of them right now in the conference. They've obviously won it now 2 years in a row when Kansas hasn't. They beat KU in Allen Fieldhouse earlier this year. They beat them by 30 in Houston last year. 2 of 3 or 2-1 is their record against the Jayhawks, including a 30-point drubbing and a win at Allen, since both teams have been in the league. And Houston's been to 5 straight second weekends, whereas Self, it's been feast or famine lately. 5 straight second weekends for Houston. Could have had a 6th if the tourney was played. Obviously, that's same for everybody with the COVID year. But I don't know, man. I mean, they don't have a national title or the Final Four, under Kelvin Sampson. They don't have like the 20 years of longevity that Bill Self had built up there and winning 14 straight Big 12 championships at one point. But even with the 2 here in what's likely to be another multi-game win, like they will win the league by multiple games. It was 2 last year, could be 2 or 3 this year. I don't know. I think you got to give it to them. For now, you got to give it to them. That doesn't mean that it's quite the assumed top dog status that Kansas had every year rolling there for a while. You're not hitting that level of it. But for now, you got to look up and say, like, Houston's the team to beat. That's who you got to knock off. Like, Houston, that's where you don't want to go play. They had a 33-game home win streak before Texas Tech snapped that this year. That's become the place where, like, nobody can win. I mean, now it's not easy, but teams are winning in Allen Fieldhouse. It's not impossible either at this point. Feels almost impossible to do it at Houston. They have the nation's longest road winning streak. Like, they don't lose road games, which is, I mean, that's where you're supposed to be able to get them. Like, that's vintage Kansas stuff. That's vintage Kansas stuff. What Houston is doing right now in this small snapshot. And yes, a lot of the damage that they did before that was the AAC, but I mean, I think that part for Kelvin Sampson has been completely vindicated by what they've done in the Big 12, obviously. So I think you can even extend that out and say, yeah, it's only been 2 years here in the Big 12, but look at what they did the 4 or 5 years before that in the AAC. I think you can kind of tack that on and include it, because it was not a problem at all for them to transition into the Big 12. So I would give it to them right now. I would. Could still be taken back. I'm also not somebody who's giving up on Bill Self, honestly, not even totally this team this year. If we're at least talking about them maybe making a second weekend, I think they could still figure that out, turn it around. Bill Self is trying to, he called it a new season now for them at this point. He's trying to pull out all the stops for that. And there are a few that have been better throughout the course of college basketball history at figuring it out. All right, a couple more super chats before I finish here. What's up, Matthew? Appreciate you, Matthew. How much longer can Kelvin Sampson coach? Houston could decline after. Absolutely, they could. Now they're going to hand it off to his son, who's definitely more or less your head coach in waiting there. So if you believe in that, now that's always very dicey. So I would understand if you have skepticism about that. Like, throughout the course of time, it's always been very dicey to just hand it off to the son of the legendary coach. So, but I know he's very, very highly thought of. very highly thought of, and I would imagine, if it weren't for that situation, would probably have had another job already. How much longer can he coach? How old is Kelvin Sampson? I feel like he looks pretty good and limber for where he's at. He's 69. So yeah, I mean, he's definitely getting up there. He's definitely getting up there. And since he has his son in place, that probably makes him more willing to, I would imagine, give it up. Supposed to hanging on too long so you're probably looking at a change within the next 5 years. I would have to imagine there, but I'm not clued in enough at Houston to know exactly what that looks like. But it's a fair point, Matthew. It's a fair point. What's up, Alan? Good to hear from you, Alan. Appropriate topic for you to chime in on here. So Alan, Kansas fan, says, John, maybe it's just me, but I'm less interested if we move to a super league with fewer teams. Seems like a better world when Cinderella would be allowed to dance. So this is back to the football discussion. Well, it's obviously it is 1,000% a better world. 1,000% a better world. What we used to have. 5 power conferences, but the toothpaste is out of the tube. That's the unfortunate thing. You can't get toothpaste back into a tube. And it's all out. It's squirted all. It's on the mirror. It's on the sink. It's on the toilet. It's everywhere. Toothpaste is out. It's not going back. So my attitude just has always been try and move forward as much as you can, make the best of what it is. Doesn't mean we can't grumble every now and then about what has happened. But yeah, I definitely agree. Houston is good, but I wouldn't count the Jayhawks out. Yes. I wouldn't either. Believe that game. Yeah. Kansas has Arizona and Tech in Lawrence. They've got to go to Houston. Be interesting to see how that plays out, but I'm not counting anybody out associated with Kansas. Not at all. I've seen too much Bill Self over the years to do any sort of thing. So don't worry about that, Alan. Don't worry about that. But thank you for being here, Alan. I appreciate your support of the channel as always, my friend. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight, hanging out. Good show. Felt like that went pretty quick. You guys took my mind off the K-State loss at UCF. Thank you very much. Didn't have to think about that for an hour. So that was very nice. I appreciate you all. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you want to support me, really would love if you subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. Link in the description. You can go to ofbnews.com to do that. John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo if you want to submit a question or comment there for me to answer on the next show. So that is going to do it for me. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you all. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I will talk to you all very soon.